Are we subsuming ourselves to death? Here at Varn blog, this is a question that's often on my mind. After all, I think people often subsume their identity in lieu of actual representation and project upon others of to whom they are subsuming their identity to all kinds of intentions and inclinations that are supposed to represent themselves in some way because people are desperate to be represented, particularly people from areas of the country whose infrastructure has been allowed to collapse and who, no matter how many times you can talk about how good the GDP of the country is doing and whether or not that's fictitious is a completely different question, still feel like they've been left behind because effectively they have. But who do they think represents them? A nouveau riche millionaire who's empowered a billionaire to go in and slash a bunch of slightly upper middle class civil servants from the public coffers. Uh, there's tons of corruption and inefficiency in government. In fact, corruption and inefficiency is part of its game. But who's actually benefiting from ending a lot of these public services? Not the populace that voted for Donald Trump, but also probably they probably weren't benefiting that much from the prior status quo either. And liberals making fun of them about egg prices don't help anything. But if somebody was really representing their interest, it wouldn't look like Donald Trump or me or you. And this is the question. Now, one person has said many times that liberals identify with institutions and identities, and conservatives identify with people who look like themselves. And that conservatives are really only interested in preserving prior status quos ideologically. When people talk about Trumpism as an ideological movement, they're correct, but it's also not why it won. It won because the Democrats fucked up, lost millions of votes effectively, and tried to tell people that the economy was doing great, despite the fact in large parts of the country it clearly isn't. But why would that lead anyone to subsume themselves? I mean, why does the liberals subsume themselves to the identity category or the institutions that they believe in, even when they clearly also are in those institutions and see them fraying all the time? Why does the blue collar working class man see himself in Donald Trump, a person whose lifestyle he can never even truly aspire to? What's the projection going on there when the policies passed do not really help them? They might get at someone's enemies, and even that's questionable. After all, when you lay off a bunch of highly skilled civil servants, they're going to probably get the tech and private sector jobs pretty quickly. Whereas people who were struggling to find them before, as things economically seem to slow down, may themselves have issues. Now, there's 1,000 issues with this, and I don't want to make this a referendum on Trumpism. Clearly, I don't think it's good, but I also think we have to look at Trumpism as a symptom of the society that produced it. And why are people identifying with these parties and candidates? I know plenty of people who identified with the Democrats, despite when Democrats did things that were not in their interest, and were surprised when people actually started breaking away and not subsuming their identities to Democratic policies. See those Michigan voters who abstained from voting because of Palestine. But by the way, even that doesn't explain what actually happened. The MAGA movement support has been relatively static until Trump came back in the office. And now we have general distrust. And I'll tell you, as a person who has been concerned about media legitimacy, I don't see a legitimate media either. I can report on the same stats and polls. And one in Newsweek might say that Gen Z is overwhelmingly supportive of Donald Trump, where CNN will say that they have a only 51% approval rating. That's a difference of 10%. Now, their bands of who they count as young is different. Newsweek was looking at 18 to 29-year-olds, and CNN was looking at 18 to 20 to 34-year-olds. But nonetheless, there was a 10% difference in the category. Trying to reconcile that isn't easy, and when you get that time after time, you start going, well, what does this all mean? Do we trust these numbers? Do we trust these institutions? And the question is probably not. But when that breaks down, and you also have a populace that doesn't really understand situations very well, and 90% of the population doesn't consume political media as the primary form of identity and expression the way elite educated liberals did for a long time, we have to ask ourselves what is happening. So are we subsuming ourselves to death? Are we identifying with institutions on one hand or demagogues on the other, to the extent that we don't know how to recognize if someone has skin in the game or not, and we don't know when they're blowing smoke up our ass or not? Well, ultimately, you can tell that I'm actually playing on a book by Neil Postman, one that is often called moralistic, but I think in the age of LLMs and generative artificial intelligence, aka statistical predicted machines, maybe we should take more seriously. So I'm going to start with a quote from Neil Postman, and then let's tie the two together. We were keeping our eye on 1984 when the year came and the prophecy didn't. Thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held, and whatever else the terror had happened, at least we had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. Well, we were to be later, Neil Postman. I hate to wake you up on that, but post 9/11, we got a lot of those Orwellian nightmares. And in fact, the amount of data the average Facebook app gets on a person would make the Stasi blush and their inefficiency. But nonetheless, we had forgotten that along with Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to the common belief, even amongst the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesize the same thing. Orwell warned that we would be overcome by externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive the people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppressors, to adore the technologies that undo their capacity to think. Algorithmic complacency, anyone? Are we subsuming ourselves to death because we're also done amusing ourselves? We can't even tell the difference anymore? Let's go back here. What Orwell feared was that those who would ban books. What Huxley feared, that there was no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. We live in a world where people do both. There are very few people who want to read the books. That goes down and down. And there's people who want to ban the books for the few people who do read them. I mean, the why not both question is increasingly on my mind between Huxley and Orwell, and Postman didn't see all that, but I think he's got a point. What happens when your political subject has degenerated to the point that they can't see themselves as active agents, but see themselves as passive consumers? Now, I don't see this as just the moralistic critique of consumerism. There's plenty of that, and it's frankly boring. What I want us to think about here is, what does it mean otherwise? Orwell feared the truth would be concealed with us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Well, both are happening. Truth is both concealed and drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and centrifugal bumble puppy. Well, again, I think history has been a little bit more towards Huxley, but they were both right. People have become subject to a captive culture that's easily manipulated because journalists will just repeat what the government says anyway. As Huxley remarked in A Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who were ever on alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Orwell added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In A Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared what fear would ruin us. Huxley feared what we desire would ruin us. What if what we desire and what we fear are more intimately tied together? This book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right, that we were amusing ourselves to death and dumbing ourselves down. But what does it mean that maybe there isn't a difference between what we desire and what we fear in the way that it manifests socially, that they're both so manipulatable that it doesn't matter anymore? And that we can only see ourselves expressed in stories, expressed in figures, expressed in institutions. So much talk about representation, but very little talk about your actual fucking agency. Why not this or that? Why support these people when you need to build a political movement to improve your life? And some of these people, whether they be Republicans or Democrats, liberals or Tories, liberals are Canadian conservatives, wherever you live. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, why are otherwise smart people doing stupid things? Why are they subsuming themselves to people who are not operating in their interest? Well, quit asking it just to Trump voters and start asking it of everyone. And ask yourselves, are we subsuming ourselves to death because we've amused ourselves to death? Like and subscribe, hit the bell. I'd like to thank some of our new patrons. We have some people go up in sponsorship. If you are a patron sponsor, which is a $15 or more sponsor a month, I don't create a lot of those. That's the highest tier I'm willing to go. You get your name put on every podcast episode in the credits. Not so much here online, but you do get it on the podcast. And you get even more say over what happens behind the Patreon wall. You can get, however, you can join for as little as $4. I would suggest you join directly on the website and not through Apple phone, because the price goes up on Apple. They add a surcharge on top of what I charge. Other services don't. All right. Well, if you want to find more, you can support us over here at Varn Blog, and I'd like to thank everyone who supports us, but particularly, I would like to thank our $15 our patrons, which include DRV. Those initials are close to my own. Jordan S, Kenneth M, Lindsay K, Mark M, and Red Wolf. Thank you all for supporting. And I'd like to thank our Kohanans, Indy, Fornon06, Aaron H, Adam B, Adriel M, Alas Pure Lorick, Alex P, Alfonso D, Algorithmist, Andrew SR, Angle, Ari B, Illuria V, B, Bela Lugosi is red, Ben H, Ben W, Ben W2, not related to Texans, Brian Farrell, Brandon L, Brandon S, Bucket, and Cal L. Carl S., Choice Fantastic, Christopher S., Cody, Cole at C, Dan H., Daniel W., Daryl, David G., David P., David S., friend of the show and guest sometimes, Devin F., Evan TW, Flush Damakura, Gabrielle C., Gerard D., Golden P., and we'll stop there. All right. Thank you so much for your support. Have a great day.